Well, President Obama justifying his proposed tax hike by saying the mega rich do not pay their fair share. But was he misleading the American public? Here's the president yesterday.
Warren Buffett's secretary shouldn't pay a higher tax rate than Warren Buffett. There's no justification for it. It is wrong that in the United States of America, a teacher or a nurse or a construction worker who earns $50,000 should pay higher tax rates than somebody pulling in $50 million.
But in a fact-check report by the Associated Press, the AP reports that, in fact, the rich do pay more than the secretaries in that example. For example, the wealthiest people on average pay a lot more than the middle class or the poor. According to the Tax Policy Center, look at this. Households making between 20 and 30 grand a year pay an average of 5.7% in federal taxes. Salaries between 40 and 50,000 pay an average of 12.5%. Households making between 50 and 75,000 pay 15%. And for those making more than $1 million a year, they pay an average of 29.1% in federal taxes. Joining me now, Fox News contributor Leslie Marshall and syndicated radio talk show host of the LeslieMarshallShow.com, along with Lars Larson, syndicated radio host of LarsLarson.com. All right, guys, so that's Lars from the Associated Press just doing a fact check on what the president said and concluding the data is just not there. The rich do pay considerably more than the middle class and the poor when it comes to taxes.
Oh, yeah, there's all kinds of numbers. In fact, if you want to talk about the really poor who make less than $18,000 a year, they pay less than 1% of the total tax burden in America. And since the 1980s, the rich have taken up a larger share, now paying about 40% of the total, whereas the very poor pay a smaller share than they did in the 1980s, up to about 86 in the tax reform then. The numbers are not on Leslie's side. I kind of feel sorry for her.
You know, Leslie, this is the Associated Press coming out. This is a quote, okay? This is a quote from the Associated Press. The data tell a different story than President Obama. On average, the wealthiest people in America pay a lot more taxes than the middle class or the poor. They pay at a higher rate, and as a group, they contribute a much larger share of the overall taxes collected by the federal government. So why is our president telling the American people something other than that?
Well, he was specifically talking about Warren Buffett, which Warren Buffett himself had said, and I know that Mr. Buffett is not lying. And Fact Check also said that over 1,400 millionaires paid zero. If they were each making $1 million, that's over $435 million. We're also talking about what these millionaires claim. And when you are wealthy with these tax loopholes, which the president is trying to get rid of, and which, by the way, Speaker Boehner and other Republicans also agree with him on, these millionaires wouldn't be able to hide their money in offshore banks in Kuwait and Switzerland, the Bahamas, buy Turkish bonds, etc. They are paying taxes based on the amount of money they claim to have earned, and a lot of that money is hidden because they can afford to have very fancy accountants hide that money.
Is that true? Because I just want to, let me just give the viewers what the actual AP report says, because Leslie mentions the 1,470 households who filed tax returns. They had incomes above $1 million, and they paid no federal income tax, according to the IRS. That is less than 1% of the nearly 237,000 returns by folks who did have incomes of higher than $1 million. The vast majority, 99% and over, paid over a 29% tax rate on their money. So is this all about those 1,400 people who took advantage of tax loopholes, Lars?
No, not at all. And in fact, what Leslie's talking about, if it's illegal activity by actually hiding and evading taxes, there are already laws against that, Leslie. Get the president to start enforcing that. But then again, the president doesn't show an inclination to enforce the law in a lot of different areas, like selling guns to Mexico or, but here's the bottom line. The bottom line is that in the 1980s, the top 1% paid 26% of the total income of the federal government through taxes. Today, they pay 40%. Meantime, the people from 33,000 income and below paid about 6% in the 80s. They now pay about 3%. It may not feel like it, but the poor and the middle class are paying less as a percentage, and the rich are paying more. What we have is a spending problem, and that's what's changed the picture.
Well, I understand. That's a separate argument, but the question for today's debate is whether the president was misleading in what he told the American people.
Of course he was.
He's talking about Warren Buffett, who uses capital gains to, when you invest and you make money on it, you pay 15% tax on that money you make. But Warren Buffett pays 35% in federal taxes on his income, just like all the people who make more than $1 million do on their income. So it is misleading to suggest that the income tax being paid by millionaires is in any way lower than the income tax being paid by the poor or the middle class. Leslie, do you agree?
I can't disagree with you on that, Megan. That I don't want to say misleading. He should have been more specific in saying that the money that they obtained as investors as opposed to the money that they have with their income. But the bottom line is they wouldn't be able to hide or get around paying less taxes, whether it's 1,400 or 14 million people at zero. It's still a hefty price tag on those 1,400 plus. When you look at the bottom line, which is the president is saying, we need to overhaul the tax code. We need to do away with these tax loopholes. This is not an attack on the rich. And Lars, I love you, but I wish you would fight for the middle and the lower income classes in our country as hard as you do for the rich folks.
Megan,
go ahead, Lars,
by the way,
quickly.
Megan, Leslie's being deceptive, and here's why. I would like to fight for the lower income. Most of my jobs throughout my entire life have been working for these so-called rich guys that the president likes to disparage. And what Leslie ignores is that if you have a corporation, Warren Buffett has a bunch of corporations, the corporation pays taxes on the money, and when it pays dividends, which, by the way, Warren Buffett has arranged his situation so that he doesn't take a dividend from many of his corporations, which lowers his tax bill and leaves his money in the corporation. The fact is that if you take the money away from the rich and you hand it to the government, as Speaker Boehner said, it's like giving more cocaine to a cocaine addict. It's not a good idea. The rich people in this country will make more jobs. They make most of the jobs right now.
Understood. My basic feeling when I watch people argue over taxes is as long as they feel it's not going to affect them, they're in favor of hiking the tax. As long as it's not going to hurt me, God bless. But you have to look at the bigger picture is what others say. Leslie and Lars, thank you.
Thanks, Megan.
We are awaiting a